Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Dave, and today we're going to talk about a pretty divisive topic, if I do say so myself, and that is whether Fromsoftware games should have an easy mode in them or not. And I'm going to go ahead and say my opinion right away, so if you disagree, you can go ahead and click off the video right away if you want. So, my opinion is that Fromsoftware should not have an easy mode in their various games. And the primary reason why is because I'm an ableist and I am a gatekeeper. So there you go. Now that you feel morally superior to me, if you disagree, let's go ahead and have an actual discussion. One thing I've been finding with this argument about Fromsoftware adding an easy mode to their games was it started with people who have trouble with challenging games being included, and morphed into this weird thing where people with disabilities were put front and center into the argument. So for the first part of the video, we're going to put that aside, and I will 100% address it at the end. So to start with a bit of history, as I think that's actually important to this discussion, around the time Demon's Souls was in production, gaming was trending towards being about trying to include everybody. And what I mean by that is every game tried to appease every person in some way. Games like Grand Theft Auto 4 were trying to put everything in the kitchen sink in their games. Gears of War and Dead Space had a plethora of difficulty settings you could choose from. Super Mario Bros., which used to be about increasing challenge, released new Super Mario Bros. Where you could play cooperatively, and if you were struggling, turn into a bubble and have your friend just carry you through the course. And I'm not complaining about this, it's just the trend things we're going towards, which is totally fine. And I'd say that things are even more extreme today with Ubisoft trying to put like literally everything they can and just cram it all into their games. So around this time, Fromsoftware set about creating Demon's Souls with Sony publishing the game. Demon's Souls was failing, and a fledgling Miyazaki was put in charge of it. He decided to make the game his unique vision, as if the game failed, it wouldn't be a big deal since the game was already considered a failure. His primary goal was to reward players for accomplishment, and even though difficulty wasn't the goal, he did drastically up the challenge in order to achieve this goal. When their producer at Sony, Kaji-san, got word of the difficulty and challenge of it, he advised Fromsoftware not to mention this to Sony, who would object to it. Then, when Shuhei Yoshida, Sony Computer's head of product development, saw the game, he stated that it was crap and an unbelievably bad game. However, Fromsoftware and Miyazaki forged forward with their vision regardless, and what they made was an incredibly niche game that ended up being fairly successful. Not ridiculously so, but enough that a successor was created in Dark Souls, and the rest was, as they say, history. The reason I bring all of this up is to make it clear how important this vision was to the team and some of the various obstacles they had to face in order to put that vision forward. The industry trend was against it, the publisher didn't want it, but what made the game stand out so much to its fan base was how focused the vision was and how instead of trying to appease everybody, Fromsoftware decided to hone in on its vision without compromise. That's a large part of why the game is so good to its target audience. It's not for everybody, it doesn't try to be, but what it does is try to be the best at its one vision of challenging players for a sense of accomplishment. And you can tell that the philosophy has been present in the majority of their future games. Now look, Fromsoftware games aren't for everybody. I have a lot of friends who I wouldn't recommend these games to, and I've had friends who tried it and decided that it was too hard for them. And that's fine. Frankly, there are a lot of games that come out that just don't interest me at all. And just because GTA and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, as a couple of examples, don't appeal to me, that doesn't make me less of a gamer. Everyone has their personal tastes and preferences, and there is a weird elitism around video games at times. And I know people seem to say now that it's a Dark Souls thing with the Git Gud mentality, but elitism has always existed around video games and not just Fromsoftware games. It also exists in every medium. I mean, there are film snobs who will complain if you don't enjoy artsy-fartsy films, there's book snobs who will complain if you don't read anything other than Harry Potter, which I could go my whole life reading only Harry Potter over and over again and be pretty happy. But the point is, elitism exists in everything, but I think most rational people who are fans of what elitism circles around will tell you that's dumb. If you don't like Dark Souls or Sekiro and prefer a more casual game like Candy Crush or Animal Crossing, that's super cool. Variety is the spice of life, and I'm glad that there's so many different ways people can enjoy this medium now. And Git Gud culture, as I've literally heard it called, in my opinion, is people not understanding the meme. For the most part, Git Gud is used as a joke in the Dark Souls community, and from outsiders looking in, I get it. It sounds elitist. But you have to understand, it's a joke. If someone asks me how to beat a boss in Bloodborne, obviously there's a strategy that will help. And technically, yeah, you should practice and get better. But the joke is you say Git Gud, like it's not even spelled right. That should be a clear indicator that people who use it aren't taking it seriously. I mean, I'd say I'm pretty good at these games, and people will tell that to me in streams sometimes, but I'm on the same wavelength as the joke, which is what it is. There's a weird misunderstanding about these games, that they're far more difficult than other games, which I'd actually disagree with. For the most part, when you learn the mechanics of Dark Souls or the boss's patterns, it's actually not the most challenging game out there. And outside of Sekiro, the Soulsborne games also allow you to play in a large multitude of styles, which can make the games easier, level up yourself and your weapons beyond what you need for a challenge, and even call in people to co-op with, where they can help you through challenges. As a comparison, I was playing Hollow Knight recently, which I absolutely adored, and got to the Godmaster DLC. And after trying it for a little bit, I decided that it was just too hard for me. It wasn't the type of challenge that I personally enjoyed, and I stopped playing it. I gave up. In my opinion, that DLC is harder than any Fromsoftware game I've ever played. There are other games I play which are harder than Dark Souls. Souls just happen to get the reputation for it due to Bandai Namco's marketing of prepare to die. And yes, for the most part, if FromSoftware added an easy mode to their games, it wouldn't personally affect me. I play games on normal mode, no matter what game it is, as I just assume that's the intended experience by the developer. However, there also is something to be said about just being thrown into an experience, and that is the only option you have. For me, that actually is part of the appeal of these games. Something about the fact that that's it, that's all you get. I actually do like that. For me, it actually adds to it in a way. And look, regardless of my personal thoughts on it, if a developer doesn't want to add it, that's perfectly fine. And as I said before, that specifically is what made FromSoftware stand out, is that they don't have mini-maps or objective markers. The mechanics are often obscure and you have to figure it out for yourself. The side missions are often missable, and entire portions of the games can be hidden away by an obscure secret. And they don't have an easy mode. They don't have any obvious easy way out. You have to deal with the challenge in front of you. The fact of the matter is, even if you never use something like an easy mode, having help just around the corner inherently creates a different atmosphere than not having help there. It's the difference between free climbing and free soloing. I know, on an entirely different level, of course. Technically, you're doing the exact same thing in both of these categories, but climbing without a rope or free soloing has a different feel to it because there's no safety there. And what you need to understand is that's an artistic choice. It's part of what makes these games stand out and feel unique, this uncompromising, honed-in vision. It's also a large part of why so many people are passionately against adding an easy mode in FromSoftware games. Specifically, there are people I've talked to who, if they had the option to turn on an easy mode, would have done so for FromSoftware games. However, because they didn't have that option, they were forced into playing the challenge the games presented, and as a result, they overcame the challenge and ended up loving the game for it. That sense of reward and accomplishment, which is what the games are designed around, is what they got due to the lack of an easy mode. And from an artistic standpoint, that's exactly why it's not included. FromSoftware doesn't want you to have that option. They want to force you into playing the game their way, and they don't want you to have a way out. And maybe, just maybe, you find yourself face to face with what seems like an insurmountable challenge. You look everywhere for a way around it and discover there is no way but forward. There's no easy mode you can switch to, nothing but your own determination. And maybe you spend hours getting annihilated, failing over and over and over and over and over again. But each time you learn something new, and one day, and in one moment, you succeed. You achieve something you didn't think was possible, something you were ready to opt out of. And maybe, in that moment, you discover that you're better than you initially thought you were, that you can achieve something that at one time seemed impossible, that you can overcome a hurdle you didn't think you could jump past. And maybe you leave that encounter a little more confident in yourself, and you realize that's a logic you can apply to the everyday world around you, and the fact that you will fail repeatedly. There is no easy mode, but now you know that every time you fail, you'll learn something new, you'll gain something out of it, and one day you will succeed. And to say that isn't art, or there wasn't a specific design decision made against being able to opt out because Fromsoftware wanted players to get this specific experience out of their games built entirely around the concept of overcoming challenge, is short-selling them. But hey, maybe that experience isn't what you want in a video game. Maybe you want something light or some sort of distraction from work, or you do want a challenge, but something that's not quite so extreme. And that is fine. That just means that this one particular game isn't for you. Nobody's forcing you to play it, nobody's forcing you to buy it, and there are so many other games that are made for you. And look, if this was the only type of game that existed, that would be a problem, because it's not for everyone. But as it stands, it's a niche game that knows it's not for everybody and the exception to the rule. I'm a huge proponent of more variety in games, and if that means that there's more games that aren't made for me personally, I think that's a great thing. I want to see more games that aren't made for me, because that means that more people get to enjoy a pastime that I'm passionate about. But part of having that variety also means that well-made niche games that aren't made for everybody also deserve to have a place to exist, even if that niche happens to be challenge. So something I want to add to showcase what I'm talking about is this video by Forge Labs on gaming journalists want easy mode in Sekiro, and I'm glancing down at my computer, by the way, if you were wondering why I'm looking down. So what I found really interesting about this is that he was a player who doesn't like difficult games and avoids them. He'd avoided Souls games, he tried playing them for a little bit, and found that he didn't like it and stopped. But here's his reaction to playing Sekiro that I'm going to include.
I've got him. I've got him. I did it. Oh my god, I did it. Oh my god. Wow. That feels so good. I know that wasn't a boss, but wow, that feels good. That is so satisfying. Okay, alright, I understand why people like Dark Souls games now. I get it. Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god, I did it. Oh, I did it. Oh, I'm not even reading this stuff right now. My heart is pounding so fast right now. My hands are... I have never experienced this in a video game before.
Now for him, I think he probably would have initially chosen to make the game easier, and that's something that I think is important to note here. While you can say that a gamer knows what they want and they're going to do what they feel like with the game that they're given to them, there has to be some sort of guidance sometimes. And I think sometimes the saying that a customer doesn't always know what they want applies to this too for art. A lot of people aren't going to throw themselves into a challenging thing. I mean, look at modern society. Everything that we built around us is to make things more convenient and less challenging. But sometimes an experience that's challenging can be incredibly rewarding, and being forced to do that is something that sometimes you don't think you want. But when you get through that experience and climbing the mountain, which is exactly what Miyazaki has referred to his games as, is kind of like climbing a mountain. When you get through the climbing of that mountain and look back, you realize, man, that journey was so worth it, and overcoming those obstacles really was something that I didn't think I wanted, but after experiencing it, I did. And that's part of where this whole gatekeeper thing comes in, with that term that I'm getting seeing thrown around by a lot of people, and some people who I respect, and it sucks to see people not get it, where it's like people who are saying that they don't want an easy mode in Sekiro or Dark Souls is because they want to share this experience that they felt of climbing the mountain. And I understand that some people don't want to play a game where they have to climb a mountain to play the game. I get that. But for this experience, that is the experience that some people got out of it. Like Forge Labs, again, showing him getting that experience. That's such a special experience to so many people, that for them feeling that and realizing that I didn't have another option, but I climbed that mountain, and that was such a great experience. That's what they want to share with people. That's what they're passionate about, and why so many people are passionate about these games. On the same token, I don't think games should have hard modes to appeal to people who love challenges. I was playing a game, Starfy, on the DS, which I was excited to get, and I started playing it and realized how simple the game was, and it was boring, and I stopped playing it. And I saw the game got a sequel, if I remember correctly, and I was glad to see that, because just because that game wasn't for me, and I turned out that I wasn't the intended audience, I'm glad that there was an audience for it, and that's super cool, and I'm glad that that game existed, and it doesn't have to have a mode made specifically for me. That's fine. What I find strange is this only really comes up with the recent Fromsoftware games. This discussion never really crops up from anything else. As an example and direct analogy, nobody ever asked Capcom to make a mode in Resident Evil that's a not scary mode. I mean, frankly, I know a large number of people who refuse to play horror games because they're too scary, yet nobody complains that these games aren't inclusive enough because they don't have a scary slider. If you want your spooky horror game to be scary and don't think it needs to have an option so there aren't quite so many jump scares, you're not considered a gatekeeper. I think it's accepted that if you buy a horror game, you're buying it with the intention that it should hopefully scare you. That's kind of the point of buying one of those games. And if that's not for you, that's not for you. On the same token, if you buy a game with a reputation for being difficult and challenging by a company whose reputation is in making difficult and challenging games, I think it's fair to have an expectation that their games are going to focus on that and not need to try to cater to everybody. If that's not for you, it's not for you, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to ask the author of a book like Moby Dick to make an easier to understand version of his book because I don't understand the words coming out of Herman Melville's mouth. I'm not going to ask David Lynch to make a film that's not super abstract and artsy and weird just because it might not appeal to me. That's what David Lynch does, and that's what he's good at for his audience and why they enjoy his things so much. And you know, if I don't understand Eraserhead or I don't enjoy a film like that, then, you know, maybe it's not for me. And beyond all of that, what you're asking for takes time and resources away from the team crafting the experience that they're trying to make. Everything in their games takes a huge amount of balance and effort, with every challenge crafted in a certain way. Every boss fight has a unique challenge built around it, a different moveset that they try to specifically craft, so players will experience a different test. You'll fight in different locations and terrains to test how well you can adapt. Asking a team to create an easy mode than just saying, oh, just set the values of everything lower and you're done. You would still need to balance it properly. If you make it so deflecting enemies in Sekiro is easier to do, okay, does that make some encounters way too easy? Does it completely trivialize certain boss fights? Or do they need to be adjusted properly? What about certain bosses and encounters that aren't built around deflecting, who I'm not going to show to avoid spoilers? Now you have to try and adjust and reprogram them or change values for them. Is your easy mode too easy? Does it trivialize the experience for players who can't play on normal but are still reasonably skilled? Is it still too difficult? Is it going to alienate the least skilled of gamers even still? Well, that all takes more time, testing, and programming. There's obviously nothing wrong with developers doing this, and most of them do, as difficulty settings are present in a lot of games. But if one developer decides that they'd rather have the game get easier by learning in-game mechanics or a plethora of other mechanics within the game or methods, which Dark Souls and Sekiro both have plenty of, then that's fine. It's not every single game. This is one game that you don't have to buy. Let's take another example. I came up with a World War II simulator. Original, I know. I've played games like Call of Duty's hard mode, which are so insanely difficult you die non-stop. Well, what if I decide I want my game to truly mimic the horrors of war? I want it to be so difficult you maybe randomly die by stray gunfire, you don't have refillable health, everything is panicky and terrifying that you do. There's a friendship system in place where you can get close to soldiers who will then help protect you, but on the flip side, if you miss an enemy shooting at them, they will die and you can't restart the mission. And the kicker, if you die in the game, you have one life. You have to start back at the very beginning. The entire goal of my game is the horror of war and how difficult that is. It's not something I would openly state, as to me, part of the art of games and part of the art of that experience is learning that for yourself without someone directly telling you. An easy mode in this particular game would completely ruin the design purpose of it. Games like Call of Duty and Battlefield, where the difficulty is an option, already exist. You can play those, but if you play my war sucks ass game, no matter how damn well I design it, and if I make that game, it would be well designed. Easy mode is antithetical to the purpose of my game. It is 100% not what my game is about, and would absolutely destroy the artistic intent behind it. To continue with this, I double majored in computer science and game design in college, and while that was a while ago, I've been working on teaching myself Unity and trying to make 3 games that I really want to make in my free time. One of these three, difficulty doesn't really factor in a traditional sense as it's not a reflex-based game. One of the three is, but I can't see any reason not to add accessibility modes to it if I had the time and budget. While I want to design the base game with a satisfying difficulty curve, I can't see any reason an easy mode would ruin that for players who want it. And finally, I have a third game I'm super passionate about wanting to make, and for that game, while difficulty isn't the artistic theme, it is important to the message I want players to get, and like my war game example, it's imperative to my art. For me, it would unfortunately completely ruin what I'm trying to convey in that particular game. I'm going to give you another kind of weird example I came up with while I was writing this. I love room escape games, and I'm not talking about live escape rooms, which I also love, but just simple online flash room escapes. I love solving puzzles, and the idea of doing that to find a key out of a room you're locked in is weirdly appealing to me. Some of these games I play, and by that I mean a lot of them, have a hint system. Click on a button and it'll give you a hint towards needing to solve the next puzzle. And there's a balance to this. Sometimes these hints are way too stupidly easy and make me mad I click the button, as it completely ruins the puzzle. Sometimes they're too obscure. And sometimes I give up and look at walkthroughs on YouTube. I find even still, a lot of times the ones that endear themselves to me the most are ones that don't have hint systems. They can still be super challenging, but the well-designed ones make you feel so smart and good about accomplishing it. And even if I'm circling a room for an hour, that feeling of satisfaction when you finally get it, and you didn't resort to the easy way out because, frankly, it didn't exist, makes the victory all that much sweeter. Similarly, hints are optional in the games that include them, but I'm just a man, guys. Sometimes I break down and click that hint button and then immediately regret it. But the option not to have it carries a different weight to it, and I'm glad that both exist. See, that's the thing. Just because one room escape game exists that doesn't have a hint button, it doesn't mean that every other room escape game shouldn't have a hint button, and one doesn't negate the other. You can just play the type that you prefer, or play both. That's cool too. So it really comes down to an artistic decision about what developers want their audience to feel. And in Fromsoftware game, that feeling of no other option existing to save you is part of the design. It's part of the art of it. And obviously, if someone doesn't think you're a real gamer or hardcore enough for not liking an experience that they like, that makes them look bad, not you. Everyone has different preferences and tastes, and judging you for not liking something that I like is pretty childish, in my opinion. Unless it's pumpkin pancakes. If you don't like pumpkin pancakes, you can't be my friend. And look, if Fromsoftware's next game has an easy mode or an assist mode or whatever, I'm not going to complain. Frankly, I don't care that much. I'm not going to boycott the game for that reason. But part of what makes these games so special is their focus on their artistic vision, and I think you can feel that in every aspect of Fromsoftware's games, which is why their games have such a beloved and passionate fan base. And I think part of that, and part of that artistic decision that encompasses all that, is not including an easy mode. I should also mention mods because I didn't realize that was a controversial thing about Sekiro until there was an article about it way after I initially wrote this video, which was honestly a couple weeks ago. It's not really what I want to talk about in this video, as my focus is more so on developers and what they choose to do. But to my personal opinion, if you buy a game, you can do whatever you want with it. It's your game. Hell, I love when people figure out ways to glitch a game and skip segments. That's part of the fun of it. And if people want to mod an easy mode into their game, you do you. But part of that leads to another point of the debate, which is disabled people. Now, I think from some people, this is a bad faith argument, and I'm going to explain why in a little bit, whereas, some people have legitimate reasons why. It kind of depends on the side that you're looking at. The strangest thing about the whole easy mode debate is how it's evolved into this debate about making Fromsoftware games accessible for disabled people. Obviously, I want everyone to be able to enjoy games that I like. If you're disabled, that sucks, and I'm super fortunate that at this point in my life, I don't have to deal with that. Part of what I love about games is that there's such a great form of escapism, and the last thing that I would want is an amazing game to have to remind you of that disabled factor. You can be whoever you want when you play a video game, and not just imagine it like when you read a book, or vicariously experience it when you watch a movie. You can actually play as that person and be them. And especially if you're going through a rough patch in life, or you have some disability holding you back, or some sort of pain. I think video games are an amazing medicine for this, and research has even shown that. I think what Able Gamers does is amazing. I love that new controllers are coming out that allow people to play, and I think it's kind of sad that everything I stated before and my passion for the art of game design is going to get tossed away by someone who thinks I'm just trying to gatekeep. So the weird thing I mean is that many of the people coming out of the woodworks yelling that Sekiro isn't accessible enough for disabled people, and those who don't want an easy mode are ableist, I've never seen argue for accessibility modes in other games. That's not to say there isn't a community of fantastic individuals searching for great ways to incorporate accessibility in all games. I'm more so talking about how many people I see who have never been an active part of that discussion, unless it's Fromsoftware. So, the one game developer who specifically makes games targeted at people who want incredibly challenging experiences is the one who's somehow been targeted by people claiming that they stand for more diversity in games. There are so many games released every single month that are intended for a wider audience that aren't meant to be niche, which don't have good accessibility options, which aren't tailored and don't have proper modes for people with disabilities. Take Breath of the Wild as an example. Breath of the Wild is, in my opinion, a game about exploration, but it can be a pretty difficult game. It's hard to control, with jumping in a weird place on the controller, and that's a big part of accessibility. And also, some of the bosses, I'm looking at you Thunderblight Ganon, are damn challenging. And look, there were definitely some people in the accessibility community talking about the lack of how accessible Nintendo games were, but it certainly wasn't getting the same uproar, and certainly not from the same people who praised Breath of the Wild without a care in the world about accessibility, but now suddenly have an issue when it's a Fromsoftware game. And the thing is, in a lot of cases, easy mode doesn't even address a lot of the problems of accessibility. Yes, 100%, there are some gamers who won't have the proper reaction time or hands can't move properly that an easy mode will be just the right balance for them, but there are others who, in many games, is simply not enough for. And sometimes the things that make games more accessible are the controls. So if a game has an easy mode but you can't remap the controller, you're already not making a game that's properly accessible. Not every disability is equal, and for some people, pressing multiple buttons at once will be the issue. For others, that's not an issue. For some, it's fast reaction times. Again, for others, it's not. This isn't a simple solution or solve all for everybody. And sometimes, making something truly accessible goes far beyond making an easy mode. Take the following tweet from Matt Thorson, one of the creators behind Celeste, which had a widely acclaimed assist mode. If Sekiro had a Celeste-style assist mode, combat speed 50 to 100%, sets game speed while enemies are aggroed. Resurrections, +1 or infinite. Invisible while sneaking, infinite posture, invincible while drinking gourd or always. He goes on to say a little bit more, including sliding scales, and his whole thread is worth reading as I think he's genuinely done the proper research in how to make games for this kind of audience, which major props to him. But something you might notice about his advice is that a lot of it comes across as things that would normally be considered cheat codes in games. Because for some people, that is going to be a proper assist mode. It's entirely different from an easy mode. They aren't the same thing. But here's the thing, if a developer thinks it's going to ruin their vision of their game, they're perfectly in their right not to include this. Again, we're talking about one developer. If this was every game, I would have a major issue with that. But it's one developer whose specific niche is in making these kinds of challenging games. I think this is an important quote from Accessible.games, which is focused on helping developers create games for people with disabilities. Providing access to your games and adapting the challenge changes your game, but we're not saying that you should limit or water down the experience your game offers. If you want your game to offer the edge-of-the-seat tension of stalking a wild animal through the forest, then that's the player experience you should be aiming for. What APX offers is a way to think about whether you could provide that experience to players with different types of disabilities. In some cases, you may not be able to make every experience accessible to everyone, but then again, not every player wants to have the experience you're offering. APX is about helping you think about what you can do for players with disabilities while still producing the game you really want to make. The point is, if Fromsoftware thinks that this is going to detract from the game that they want to make, then that's fine. It's not for everyone. And look, in general, I have nothing against developers choosing to make their games more accessible. That's fantastic, and I think more developers whose core experiences and artistic expressions aren't affected should seriously consider it. And I recommend checking out Accessible.games in the description if you are a developer watching, which works with developers to do just that. Also, the fact that cheat codes don't exist anymore in games just sucks. I miss those. Those were fun. I do want to provide some articles, which I think are good, genuine discussions around accessibility, which are, of course, circling around Sekiro as that's the trend right now. And yes, ones that include opinions that are different than mine, because that's totally cool. I find it to be an interesting discussion when people aren't trying to belittle those who have different opinions. And looking through these, a lot of people asking for more accessibility options are the same people asking for this in most games, and a lot of them aren't asking for an easy mode. They praise things like Sekiro having controller remapping, or the samurai zombie at the beginning of the game who allows you to train with no consequence, or the tutorial. As an aside, some of these things, like the trainer and intro style, in my opinion, wouldn't work in Souls, but does in Sekiro, as every game is different. Anyways, point being, these are forms of accessibility. And from what I've seen of the accessibility community, they're actually super understanding of not wanting to ruin an experience. However, at the same time, adding functionality around it that can make the game more accessible. That's definitely not the same answer for every game, and sometimes things as simple as audio sliders and controller remapping, which Sekiro has, or colorblind options are simple solutions many games can take to truly open up their accessibility. The two specific easy mode articles I've seen that seem to just throw the community in without really understanding are Dave Thier's Forbes article on Sekiro, Shadows dies twice, needs to respect its players and add an easy mode. Yes, he literally misspelled the title of the game in the article header, and Joshua Rivera's Kotaku article on how easy mode has never ruined a game are really the only two I've seen which I strongly disagree with. But this isn't a widespread everybody in games journalism thing. The articles I mentioned earlier are fine discussions. Also, doing a quick search, you tend to see the same article writers repeatedly complaining every time a Fromsoftware game comes out. For example, a quick Google search reveals Dave Thier also complained that Dark Souls 3 needed an easy mode in 2016. But you'll actually find another Forbes article by one of his contemporaries, Erik Kain, completely disagreeing with him, who also happens to be a games journalism and wrote in Forbes. And I'm not telling you to send Dave Thier harassment. Please do not do that. My point is that most of the discussions around accessibility are actually handled well, and I think that it's these few ones with headlines that are made to get clicks and piss people off that have somehow gone on to represent all game journalists. Something to note about accessibility is there's a lot of different ways to make your games more accessible to players. And so long as it doesn't affect the core gameplay experience the developer specifically wants players to get, I don't see any reason not to include it. Things like Sekiro, including button remapping, that's something incredibly important to making the game more accessible, but really doesn't affect the core of their game. Sliders on the audio, where some players could get overwhelmed from all the noise and music with certain disabilities, again, something Fromsoftware's recent games all include. Another example would be color blindness options. There are ways to make games more accessible in, say, Sekiro, that I'm all for, and I'm sure there are things I haven't thought of, like my above examples, that would go a long way towards helping more people be able to enjoy the game without setting up some unnecessary boundary. Again though, something like an easy mode or even an assist mode similar to Celeste, if a developer chooses not to include that, I think that's okay. And some of the accessibility options I listed above don't apply to every game either. I say the controls of Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons are imperative to the game. There's some games where color helps tell the story, and maybe the developers think changing that will ruin their vision. Perhaps audio is core to the game, and that's something the developers won't compromise on. I'm using these as examples because these are things, as I stated, I don't think there's any reason for Sekiro to exclude. But one that does, in my opinion, affects Sekiro and Fromsoftware games very specifically is in easy mode. But I think that wraps up everything I want to say, and if you still think I'm a gatekeeper or an ableist, that's fine. But I'd question how morally superior you really are if you're trying to bully and shame somebody into having your opinion. It just comes across as skeezy to me. And if you are a disabled gamer who watches my content, I genuinely love to know what you think. Even if it's strongly disagreeing with me, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Overall, I don't think Fromsoftware games should add an easy mode because I don't think it's in line with the artistic intent behind their games. A lot of people have fallen in love with their games in part thanks to the lack of its existence, and I don't think every game should have a requirement like that. At the same time, if that was every game, that would be a huge problem. But as it stands, variety is a great thing, and if more games have accessibility modes, I think that's great. And I don't think one niche game for a niche audience needs to be made for everybody. even if that game has good marketing behind it, which, by the way, is an argument I legitimately heard, that because this game has marketing, it's not niche anymore or doesn't deserve, or niche games made for niche people don't deserve to have marketing, apparently. Yeah, I heard that. You know, Resident Evil is considered a niche game. Survival horror games are considered niche, but that's still got decent marketing. Typically, my issues with easy mode, which again is different than an assist mode, tend to be in their overall design. I think there's more interesting ways to accomplish the same thing, which are far more enjoyable in game and not as lazy. Super Mario World is an amazing example of putting an easy mode in a game without anyone realizing it, and in a super rewarding way, which is why I'm working on writing a video about just how amazing the game design of Super Mario World is. And with that beautiful transition, good job, me. If you enjoyed this video, check out some of my other videos on game design discussion. I have a plethora of videos around Fromsoftware games over the years, and if you want a dose of something a little more fun, check out my super shows. I love making them, and they're love letters around some of my favorite games, like my 2018 Game of the Year, Red Dead Redemption 2, which, I'm just saying, is super accessible, or one of my favorite Fromsoftware games of all time, Kingsfield. As always, a huge thank you to all my patrons. This episode I'd like to thank Jason Buck, Invidentia, and Jacob. Seriously, guys, cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. Later, guys. Peace.